Hi everybody, we're going to be talking about calculating a tip today. The fancy dancy name for a tip is a gratuity, or if you speak Spanish, it is propina, but they all mean the same thing. A gratuity or a tip is an amount added to the original price of a service. A service is when you pay someone to do something for you, like someone that cuts your hair, or someone that cleans your house, or even someone who is your server at a restaurant. It is usually represented by a percentage, and sometimes we shortcut that by just writing the percent symbol. And a tip can be any amount, but the common percentage for a tip is 15 to 20% of the total. And I'm going to go ahead and put that below there because I didn't want to get in the middle of the other writing. All right. We have 4 methods for calculating tip or gratuity, and we're going to show you all 4. So let's go ahead and start with the first method. The first method is the model method. So if you can see that model there, that it is split into 10 equal pieces. So if you look across the bottom, before you start on the left, it's 0%. Halfway through is 50%, and then all the way to the end is 100%. So those are the percentages. So if you divide 100 by 10 rectangles, that means that each one of those is 10%. So I'm just going to draw an arrow to one of them, and I'm going to write 10% up here. So you know that each rectangle is 10%. All right, let's get to the problem now. It says Lily ordered takeout from her favorite restaurant, and the bill came to $50. She decides to leave a 20% tip. How much is the tip? Is the first question. So let's answer that first. Well, if she's going to leave 20%, this is 10, this would be 20. That's 2 of those blocks. We know each one is 10%. So how can we find out what their value is? Well, if 100% of the bill is $50, let's divide it by the 10 pieces. That means each piece is $5. The first piece is $5, and the second piece is $5. So when you add that together, your tip equals $10. Now that's great, except that when you pay for something, you first have to pay for what you got, that service. Then you add the tip. A tip will always make your total go up. So it says, what's the total amount that she will pay? Well, first she started with the $50 that the meal cost. Then she was generous, added that $10 20% tip. And if you add that together, that means her total was $60. So if you have questions about this, ask us. But we're going to go ahead to model number 2. So model number 2 is to estimate. An estimate is a really good guess. If somebody looked at me, they might estimate that I'm 5 foot tall. Pretty close. I'm 5'3". For Amber, they might estimate that she is almost 6. Well, she's 5'9", so in my world, she is almost 6 foot. So let's look at this and talk about estimating. It says, Alex took his family out for breakfast. The cost of the meal was $62. If he leaves an 18% tip, what amount will Alex leave, or estimate the amount that Alex will leave? First thing you do, you find each number in your problem, and let's get it to the nearest 10, okay? So 62 would not round to 60, or actually it would. It would round to 60 because it is not close enough to round to 70. That 2 means stay where you are. 18%, well, that 8 is above 5, so it would go up. So the tip estimate is 20%. Okay, excuse me, I did that, yes. So that's 20% up here, and this would be $60. All right, so now we want to estimate the amount of the tip that Alex will give. So we're going to write that out as 20% of $60 is equal to $12. So that's the estimate of our tip. So let me show you real quick in Desmos how we did that. We said 20% of 60 is 12, correct? So we know that the tip is $12. But here it says also estimate the total. Well, the estimate for the meal was $60. And up above, we estimated the tip to be about 12. So that means that the estimate for the entire cost, everything including tip, would be 72. So I can show you again how to go ahead and do this in Desmos. We know that we always put the cost, the cost that you are paying first. Then, like I said, you add a tip. But instead of typing in that 12, let's practice using this ANS button. That way you don't have to worry about mistakes, and it pulls the 12 down for you to add it, giving you 72 as a total. All right, let's go ahead and check method number 3. Method number 3 for calculating a tip is called the percent of method. So what we're going to do is we are going to read it carefully. We're going to use Desmos again, but this time we're using correct numbers. We are not estimating. So Jordan and his friends had dinner at a restaurant, and the meal cost $75.56. The restaurant charges customers an 18% gratuity. Sometimes a restaurant charges you a specific percent because maybe you have a very large party of people and it took quite a bit of work to serve the table. Or often in more fancy restaurants, there is a set, a higher suggested gratuity rate, so that also could be it. So let's go ahead and look at this and say, okay, we want 18% of 75.56 to come up with the exact tip amount. So I'm going to start with 18% of $75.56, and that tells me that my tip alone is $13.60. And remember, I used Desmos to figure that out. Now it's asking, what is the price for the entire meal? Well, after adding the gratuity. We know the gratuity, looking over at Desmos, is $13.60 because I rounded to the nearest hundredth. Money has 2 decimal places, which is the hundredths place. So now I want a total. So again, I'm going to start with the cost. That's a good habit to get into, and I'll explain why in the next notes. So 75.56, and again, we are going to add. So to continue, I took the cost, 75.56, and I am adding the $13.60, but I'm going to use that ANS button down there so that it pulls it down for me. So that means my total cost, the cost of the meal plus the gratuity, would be $9.16. Okay, again, I'm rounding to the nearest cent, which is the hundredths place, 2 decimal places. Okay, we're doing really well. Let's try method number 4. Okay, so I'm going to come right over here. Method number 4 involves decimals. I'm not sure why, but decimals get a really bad rap. I gotta admit, I'm very much a fan of fractions, but decimals are definitely necessary and we want to be able to work with them. This says that Rachel and her friends had lunch at a cafe where the bill came to $96.12. If Rachel decides to leave a 22% tip, how much will she tip the server? Well, the first thing you want to do is to convert, since we want to use decimals, 22% to a decimal. So let me show you how to do that with decimals. 22% divided by 100 will give you the decimal. So that decimal is 0.22. Then we want to multiply that by the cost of the meal. So I'm going to take this here, because I already have it in my calculator, I might as well use it. And I'm going to multiply times 96.12. And that gives me $21.15, because that 6 pushes that 4 up. And that's her tip, or her gratuity. So here you would say Rachel will tip her server $21.15. Now the next question is asking, what is the total amount that Rachel will pay? Of course, just like before, to get a total, you start with the cost and you add your tip. So let's do that right over here. Let's start with the cost, $96.12, and let's add the amount of our tip, which was $21.15. Again, it's right above there, so I could use answer, or I'm going to show you that you could go ahead and type it in. I don't prefer that, but you can do it. So that means that the total is 117.27. Just so I can show you, though, I'm going to go ahead and backspace through the amount, and I'm going to type ANS, and it gives you the exact same thing, because the 6 rounds up that next 6 to a 7. So just remember, you have 2 options there. You can type ANS or just use the button at the bottom. All right? Now, there is one way to do this in one step, and that's understanding how decimals compare to percentages. We know that our percentage was 0.22. And we know that we want the entire amount. So what percent of the bill is 96.12? It's 100%, correct? So all you have to do is put a 1.22. That's 100% and 22% together. So I'm going to take that, then you multiply that by the amount of the meal, and you will get the same total. But let me show you over here. 1.22 means 100% of the cost plus the 22% tip, and we're going to multiply that by the amount, 96.12, and that gives us a total of 117.27. I love this method, but if you need a little bit more explanation about it, reach out. We want to make sure that you understand all four of these methods for calculating a tip or gratuity.